Welcome, dear listener, to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and together we'll search for truth where others see only tea and roses. But beware, behind the lace curtains lurks betrayal, and behind every clue, a killer waits, in the quaint English village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets simmer like tea in a kettle. Elderly sleuth Miss Jane Marple receives an elegant invitation to a harvest luncheon at Willowbrook Manor. Hosted by the poised widow Eleanor Hargrove, the Sunday gathering promises polite chatter among a colourful cast. The boisterous Captain Trent with his seafaring grudges, fiery artist Lydia Fairchild chafing under family chains, stern barrister Sir Geoffrey Langton, and his icy wife Lady Isabel, the watchful Dr. Croft, and the pious Reverend Hale. But beneath the crystal glasses and roast pheasant lurks deadly deception. Midway through the meal, Sir Geoffrey collapses in agony, poisoned by cyanide in his private mustard pot. As Inspector Craddock arrives, grilling suspects amid whispers of debts, affairs, and embezzlement, Miss Marple's keen eyes unravel the tangled web. Who slipped the fatal dose? A jealous rival? A desperate lover? Or the unlikely holy man hiding a sinful secret? Join the unravelling of human frailty in this Agatha Christie-inspired tale of betrayal and brilliance, where every guest harbours a motive, and only one spinster sees the truth. Imagine a sun-drenched Sunday luncheon at Willowbrook Manor, where elegant guests gather for harvest cheer. But death crashes the party. When the powerful Sir Geoffrey Langton collapses mid-bite, clutching his throat and gasping poison, the room erupts in horror. Was it the bitter sauce, or something more sinister? Enter the unassuming Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, who sees through the facade of secrets, a captain's old grudge, a niece's stifled dreams, a doctor's hidden vials, a vicar's dark debts, a wife's forbidden love, and a hostess's desperate loans. As Inspector Craddock interrogates, clues unravel, threatening notes, tampered medicines, whispered garden confessions. But only Miss Marple connects the deadly dots. A mustard pot laced with cyanide, a red herring vial, and a killer's fatal slip. In this twisting Agatha Christie-style whodunit, betrayal blooms like poisoned roses. Who among the Sunday guests struck the fatal blow? Stay tuned, the truth will shock you. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Willowbrook, in the serene village of St. Mary Mead, where the thatched cottages nestled like contented hens along winding lanes, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Miss Jane Marple occupied her customary spot by the window of her modest drawing-room. The autumn light slanted through the panes, illuminating the delicate web of her knitting, an intricate shawl of soft wool that grew steadily under her nimble fingers. At 70-odd years, she appeared the epitome of a gentle spinster, frail in frame, with silver, hair neatly pinned, and eyes of a deceptively mild blue that belied a mind as sharp as a paring knife. Her young maid, Cherry Baker, bustled in with a tray of tea, her cheeks flushed from the kitchen's warmth. "There you are, Miss Marple. A nice cuppa to tide you over till supper. And oh, the postman's just brought this fancy envelope for you. Looks important, it does." Miss Marple set aside her needles with a soft click and accepted the letter, her gaze lingering on the elegant crest embossed in gold. A willow tree entwined with a brook, the insignia of Willowbrook Manor. She slit the seal with a paper knife, unfolding the heavy cream paper to reveal Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's flowing script. "My dear Miss Marple," it began, "I do hope this finds you in good health. As the harvest draws near, I'm hosting a modest Sunday luncheon at Willowbrook to gather a few friends and neighbours in celebration. Your wisdom and company would be a true delight amidst our little assembly. Pray, do join us at noon." A list of guests followed, penned in a postscript. The Reverend Thomas Hale, whose sermons were as soothing as they were lengthy. Dr. Reginald Croft, the village physician with his probing eyes and steady hands. Young Lydia Fairchild, Eleanor's artistic niece, fresh from art school and full of modern notions. Captain Marcus Trent, a weathered seafarer whose stories of tempests and treasures never fail to captivate. And Sir Geoffrey Langton, the eminent barrister from London, arriving with his elegant wife, Lady Isabel, whose poise masked a rumoured discontent. Miss Marple leaned back in her armchair, sipping her tea thoughtfully. She had encountered Eleanor Hargrove at the parish tea only last month. A striking woman in her 50s, widowed young and possessed of a fortune that allowed her to refurbish Willowbrook with lavish taste. Yet there was something in Eleanor's manner, a calculated warmth that reminded Miss Marple of Mrs. Elspeth McGillicuddy, that old acquaintance whose smiles often hid sharper intentions. And the guests what a curious mix. The vicar, ever the moral compass, but with whispers of financial straits at the rectory. Dr. Croft, reliable yet secretive about his late-night house calls. Lydia, impulsive and dreamy, perhaps chafing under familial expectations. The captain, boisterous but burdened by debts from ill-fated ventures. And the Langtons, Sir Geoffrey's legal prowess was legendary, but village tongues wagged about his ruthless dealings, while Lady Isabel's cool reserve suggested hidden storms. Why this gathering now? Miss Marple wondered, as Cherry cleared the tray with a cheerful hum. Harvest celebrations were common enough, but Eleanor's note carried an undercurrent of urgency, like a summons disguised as hospitality. In St. Mary Mead, such invitations often unveiled more than mere pleasantries. They peeled back layers of politeness to reveal the raw edges of human frailty. Greed, envy, old grudges, festering like untended wounds. She recalled a similar affair years ago at Gossington Hall, where a simple party had unravelled into tragedy, exposing secrets that polite society preferred buried. People were much the same everywhere, she reflected, their motives threaded through conversations like invisible yarns, waiting for a keen eye to trace the pattern. With a decisive nod, Miss Marple penned her acceptance on a card from her writing desk. "Cherry, dear, would you post this for me? And tell Raymond's man I'll need the car on Sunday." As the maid departed, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needles resuming their rhythmic dance. Outside, the leaves whispered in the breeze, and she felt a familiar tingle, the subtle thrill of anticipation, as if the air itself hinted at shadows lurking beyond the sun-dappled facade of Willowbrook Manor. Chapter 2. Arrival at the manor. The Sunday morning sun rose with a crisp clarity that painted the countryside in hues of gold and amber, as if nature itself were conspiring to cloak any impending shadows in deceptive brightness. Miss Jane Marple, attired in her customary tweed suit, practical yet subtly elegant, with a brooch of antique pearl at her collar, stepped into the waiting motor car, provided by her nephew Raymond. The chauffeur, a taciturn fellow named Jenkins, tipped his cap and eased the vehicle along the narrow lanes of St. Mary Mead, where villagers paused in their post-church strolls to wave at the familiar figure. As they approached Willowbrook Manor, the road wound through ancient oaks whose leaves rustled like whispered secrets. The estate emerged suddenly, a grand Georgian structure of mellow brick and tall chimneys, its facade adorned with climbing ivy, that seemed to grip the walls with possessive fingers. Tall windows gleamed, reflecting the azure sky, and the gravel drive crunched under the tires like brittle bones. Miss Marple alighted with a graceful nod to Jenkins, her small black handbag clutched firmly, containing nothing more than a handkerchief, spectacles, and a slim notebook for jotting inconsequential thoughts. Or so it appeared. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove awaited at the entrance, her posture impeccable in a gown of dove-grey silk that shimmered with understated luxury. Her hair, streaked with silver, was swept into an elegant chignon, and her smile radiated the warmth of a hostess determined to orchestrate perfection. "Miss Marple, how utterly splendid you've come!" she exclaimed, extending gloved hands in greeting. "The drive wasn't too taxing, I hope. The roads can be so unpredictable this time of year." "Not at all, my dear," Miss Marple replied mildly, her blue eyes taking in the faint lines of strain around Eleanor's mouth, lines that no powder could fully conceal. "Your invitation was most kind. Willowbrook looks as charming as ever, though I recall it from the days of old Lord Hargrove, when the gardens were famed for their roses." Eleanor's laugh tinkled like crystal, but it held a note of brittleness. "Ah, yes, the roses. We've revived them splendidly. Do come in. The others are arriving." She ushered Miss Marple into the hall, a vast space panelled in oak and hung with portraits of stern ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. A faint scent of beeswax and fresh flowers mingled with something sharper, perhaps the tang of anticipation, or was it unease? The first to catch Miss Marple's eye was the Reverend Thomas Hale, standing by the marble fireplace with a glass of sherry in hand. A man in his late 50s, tall and gaunt, with a face etched by years of delivering sermons on virtue and vice. His clerical collar was starched to perfection, but his fingers drummed subtly against the stem of his glass, betraying a restlessness uncommon in one so composed. "Miss Marple," he intoned, his voice resonant as a church bell, "a pleasure to see you outside the pews. Mrs. Hargrove's gatherings always promise edification." "Indeed, Reverend," Miss Marple said, accepting a sherry from a uniformed maid, "though I find edification often hides in the most unexpected corners." She noted his quick glance toward the door, as if expecting, or dreading, another arrival. Moments later, the crunch of gravel announced Dr. Reginald Croft. He entered with brisk efficiency, a compact man of middling height, his greying hair cropped short and his spectacles perched on a nose that spoke of scholarly pursuits. His medical bag, though unnecessary for a social call, dangled from his arm like a talisman. "Eleanor, my compliments on the weather. You seem to have ordered it specially," he said, his tone dry as autumn leaves. Turning to Miss Marple, he added, "And you, madam, are looking remarkably well. No ailments to report?" Miss Marple chuckled softly. "None that a quiet afternoon won't cure, Doctor. Though I must say, your presence reassures one. Accidents do happen, even at luncheons." Croft's eyes flickered behind his lenses, a momentary shadow crossing his features before he nodded politely. The room brightened further with the entrance of Lydia Fairchild, Eleanor's niece. A vision of youthful vitality, she was 25, with cascading auburn curls, that framed a face of delicate beauty, her eyes a vivid green that sparkled with unspoken dreams. Dressed in a flowing frock of emerald muslin, she carried a sketchbook under one arm, her fingers stained faintly with charcoal. "Aunt Eleanor, the light in the conservatory is divine today, perfect for capturing the orchids," she declared, her voice lilting with enthusiasm. Spotting Miss Marple, she curtsied lightly. "Oh, the famous Miss Marple! Aunt speaks of your keen insights. Do tell, have you solved any mysteries lately? Only the small ones, my dear, Miss Marple replied, observing the girl's restless energy. The way her gaze darted to the window as if longing for escape. Like why the cuckoo sings off-key in spring, but people, they provide the real puzzles. Captain Marcus Trent burst in next, his arrival heralded by a hearty laugh that echoed off the walls. A robust figure in his 60s, with a weathered face bronzed by tropical suns and a moustache that bristled like a hedgehog. He wore a tweed jacket strained at the seams from years of seafaring indulgences. "Eleanor, lass, you've outdone yourself. The place smells of success and good brandy." He clapped the vicar on the back, nearly spilling his sherry. "Reverend, hope you're not preaching temperance today. We sailors need our grog." To Miss Marple, he bowed with exaggerated gallantry. "Madam, your reputation precedes you. Ever been to sea? The waves tell tales as twisted as any village gossip." "I've navigated a few storms on land, Captain," Miss Marple said, her smile serene as she noted the faint tremor in his hand. "A sailor's tic or something more?" His eyes, sharp as a compass needle, lingered on Eleanor with a familiarity that bordered on possessive. Finally, the Langtons arrived in a sleek motor car that purred to a halt outside. Sir Geoffrey Langton, a commanding presence at 50, strode in with the assurance of a man accustomed to courtrooms and conquests. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair threaded with grey, he exuded authority in a tailored suit that whispered of Savile Row. "Eleanor, gracious as ever," he boomed, kissing her hand with a flourish. His voice carried the timbre of a barrister cross-examining fate itself. Beside him, Lady Isabel Langton glided like a shadow, her beauty ethereal yet remote. Slender and fair, with porcelain skin and hair the colour of moonlight. She wore a gown of sapphire blue that accentuated her aloof elegance. Her eyes, a cool grey, surveyed the room with detached interest. "Charming assembly," she murmured, her tone laced with faint boredom. To Miss Marple, she inclined her head. "I've heard of your observations. How quaint!" As the group mingled, Eleanor guided them toward the conservatory, a glass-enclosed haven bursting with exotic blooms, orchids unfurling like secrets, ferns arching gracefully. Aperitifs were served, chilled sherry for the ladies, whiskey for the gentlemen. Conversation flowed tentatively at first, touching on the harvest's bounty, the vicar's upcoming fete, and distant echoes of the Great War that still haunted older souls like the captain. Miss Marple, seated on a wicker chair amid the foliage, sipped her drink sparingly, her ears attuned to the undercurrents. She caught Sir Geoffrey's low murmur to Eleanor. "That matter we discussed. It's settled, then?" Eleanor's reply was a hushed affirmative, her cheeks flushing slightly. Nearby, Lydia sketched the captain's profile, but her pencil hesitated when he leaned close, whispering something that made her laugh. A laugh too bright, too forced. Dr. Croft engaged the Reverend in talk of herbal remedies, his voice dropping as he mentioned a rare poison from the East Indies. "Fascinating in theory, deadly in practice." The vicar nodded gravely, but his knuckles whitened on his glass. Lady Isabel, standing apart, gazed through the glass at the gardens, her reflection revealing a flicker of discontent that vanished when her husband approached. Captain Trent regaled the group with a yarn of a mutiny averted by cunning, his gestures broad. But Miss Marple noted how his eyes flicked to Sir Geoffrey with a glint of old rivalry, perhaps a shared venture soured by legal wrangling. And Lydia, dear impulsive Lydia, brushed past her aunt with a whispered, "Must we endure his pontificating?" referring no doubt to her uncle by marriage. As the clock chimed noon, Eleanor clapped her hands. "To the dining room, everyone! The pheasant awaits!" The party moved as one, laughter masking the subtle frictions that Miss Marple alone seemed to sense, like faint cracks in fine china. Human nature, she mused silently, was a garden of thorns disguised as roses, and Willowbrook's blooms hid barbs that promised to draw blood before the day was done. Chapter 3. The Fatal Luncheon. The dining room at Willowbrook Manor exuded an air of timeless grandeur, its long mahogany table gleaming under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers that dangled like inverted ice sculptures from the coffered ceiling. Heavy damask curtains framed tall windows overlooking the manicured lawns, where the afternoon sun cast elongated shadows that danced like uninvited spectres. Silver candelabra stood sentinel along the centre, their flames flickering gently, though daylight rendered them superfluous. Places were set with meticulous precision. Bone china plates etched with the Hargrove crest, sterling cutlery polished to a mirror sheen, and napkins folded into elegant swans that seemed poised for flight. Eleanor Hargrove led the procession from the conservatory, with the poise of a general marshalling her troops, her silk gown whispering against the Persian rug. "Please, everyone, take your seats as you wish, though I've placed name cards to encourage mingling," she announced, her voice laced with a hostess's practiced cheer. Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the subtle orchestration. Sir Geoffrey at the head, opposite Eleanor, with Lady Isabel to his right and the captain to his left, an arrangement that positioned rivals in close quarters. Lydia claimed a spot beside Dr. Croft, her sketchbook discreetly tucked away, while the Reverend settled across from Miss Marple, his Bible-like composure masking a faint pallor. As servants glided in with the first course, a delicate consommé scented with herbs from the estate's garden, the conversation ignited like kindling. Sir Geoffrey, dominating as ever, raised his glass of claret. "To our gracious hostess," he toasted, his barrister's baritone resonating. "May Willowbrook's harvest be as bountiful as its secrets are well kept." Laughter rippled around the table, but Miss Marple caught the edge in his words, a veiled jab that made Eleanor's smile tighten imperceptibly. The soup spoons clinked softly against porcelain, as topics meandered from the mundane to the provocative. Captain Trent, swirling his wine with a sailor's vigour, launched into a tale of a stormy voyage to the Indies. There we were, waves crashing like thunder, and the cargo, precious spices that could make a man rich or ruin him. But a sly partner back in port skimmed the profits, the scoundrel. His eyes locked on Sir Geoffrey for a fraction too long, hinting at ancient grievances. "Justice at sea is swift, unlike in your courts, Langton?" Sir Geoffrey chuckled, but his knuckles widened on his spoon. "Ah, Captain, the law favours the prepared mind, not the vengeful heart. I've untangled many a knotty deal, some involving old salts like yourself." The exchange hung in the air, charged like static before a lightning strike, until Lady Isabel interjected smoothly, "Darling, do spare us the legalese. Let's talk of pleasanter things. Miss Fairchild, your art. Tell us about Paris. I hear the salons are alive with scandal." Lydia's cheeks flushed with excitement, her green eyes sparkling. "Oh, the freedom there! No stuffy conventions, just pure expression. But Uncle Geoffrey thinks it frivolous. Says I should marry respectably instead of chasing dreams." She shot a defiant glance at Sir Geoffrey, who dabbed his lips with his napkin. "Nonsense, girl. Your trust fund isn't for bohemian whims. Stability first. I've seen too many fortunes squandered on fads." Dr. Croft cleared his throat, steering the talk to safer waters. Speaking of health, the harvest air does wonders for the constitution. Though I've treated a few cases of overindulgence lately, nothing a tonic won't cure. His gaze flickered to the captain, who laughed heartily, but reached for his glass with a steadier hand than before. The Reverend, stirring his soup methodically, murmured, "Moderation in all things, as the good book advises, yet temptation lurks everywhere, even at table." Miss Marple, savouring her consommé in small sips, absorbed it all like a sponge. She recalled a similar luncheon in her youth, where polite barbs had foreshadowed betrayal, much like the undercurrents here. Eleanor's fingers toyed with her necklace, a pearl strand that caught the light unevenly, as if one bead were false. And Lady Isabel's composure, too perfect, like a mask sculpted from ice. The main course arrived with flourish. Roast pheasant, golden and succulent, accompanied by mounds of buttered vegetables harvested that morning, crusty rolls still warm from the oven, and a rich sauce-boat brimming with gravy infused with wild mushrooms, and a hint of something exotic, perhaps bitters from the conservatory's herbarium. Servants carved and served with silent efficiency, the aroma filling the room like an intoxicating fog. As forks met plates, the dialogue deepened. Eleanor, regaining her verve, inquired about the vicar's parish work. "Reverend Hale, your fund for the orphanage? How fares it? Geoffrey has been most generous with advice." The barrister nodded magnanimously, but the Reverend's response was measured. "Indeed, his counsel is invaluable, though charitable souls sometimes face unforeseen audits." A shadow crossed his face, swiftly banished by a sip of water. Captain Trent, attacking his pheasant with gusto, turned to Dr. Croft. "Doc, ever treat a man for poison? Nasty stuff in the tropics. Arrows tipped with curare, silent as a ghost." Croft's fork paused mid-air. "Rarely here, Captain, but cyanide's a devil. Odourless, tasteless, strikes like lightning. Used in photography, you know, or pest control." Lydia shivered dramatically. "How gruesome! I'd rather die of a broken heart in Montmartre." Sir Geoffrey sampled the sauce liberally, drizzling it over his portion. "This is exquisite, Eleanor, though I detect a bitter note, like almonds gone awry." He savoured another bite, then frowned slightly. "Perhaps the herbs are too bold." Eleanor waved it off with a light laugh. "Our cook experiments, but it's harmless. More wine, everyone." The banter continued, weaving threads of alliance and discord. Miss Marple noted Lydia's furtive glance at her aunt, a mix of affection and impatience. The captain's surreptitious pat of Eleanor's hand under the tablecloth. Lady Isabel's untouched plate, her eyes distant as if plotting an escape. The doctor dissected his bird with surgical precision, while the Reverend ate sparingly, his lips moving in silent grace. Suddenly, Sir Geoffrey set down his fork with a clatter. His face, ruddy moments ago, drained to a ghostly pallor. Beads of sweat purled on his brow as he clutched at his collar. "Air! I need," he gasped, his voice a ragged whisper. The table fell silent, all eyes upon him. He rose unsteadily, knocking over his chair, then doubled over, hands pressing his throat. "Poison! It's poison!" The words escaped in a strangled croak before he convulsed, collapsing forward, his head thudding against the table amid shattered china and spilled sauce. Chaos erupted. Eleanor screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. Lydia leapt back, her chair scraping harshly. "Uncle!" Captain Trent surged to his feet, bellowing for help. Dr. Croft, composure intact, knelt beside the fallen man, fingers probing for a pulse. "Stand back! Give him space!" He loosened the collar, tilting the head. but after tense moments shook his head gravely. He's gone. Cyanide, by the symptoms, convulsions, asphyxia, deadly swift. The Reverend murmured a prayer, his voice trembling. Lady Isabel remained seated, her face a mask of shock, though Miss Marple detected a fleeting relief in her eyes before it vanished. Servants rushed in, faces ashen, as Eleanor sobbed into her napkin. How? Who could? Miss Marple, unruffled amid the turmoil, scanned the scene. The overturned glass, sauce splattered like blood, positions frozen in accusation. Human folly, she thought, always surfaced at feasts, greed masquerading as appetite, vengeance served cold on a warm plate. The air thickened with suspicion, the chandelier's light now harsh, illuminating faces etched with guilt or fear. As the doctor summoned authorities, she pondered the clues already sown, like seeds in fertile soil, waiting to sprout truth from tragedy. Chapter 4. The Inspector's Arrival. The dining room, moments ago a stage for conviviality, had transformed into a grim tableau. The air heavy with the metallic tang of fear and the faint acrid ghost of cyanide. Sir Geoffrey Langton lay slumped across the mahogany table, his lifeless hand still clutching a crumpled napkin, the remnants of his last meal scattered like wreckage. The chandelier's light cast jagged shadows, and the guests frozen in their seats or hovering uncertainly resembled actors awaiting a director's cue. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the window, her knitting abandoned in her lap, surveyed the scene with her gentle yet piercing gaze, noting every detail. The quiver in Lydia's lip, the captain's clenched fists, the Reverend's whispered litany, and Lady Isabel's unnatural stillness, as if she were carved from alabaster. The distant wail of a siren heralded the arrival of Inspector Craddock, a lean, sharp-eyed man in his 40s whose reputation for doggedness preceded him. He strode into Willowbrook Manor with the brisk authority of one accustomed to commanding chaos, his dark suit slightly creased from a hasty summons. Behind him trailed Sergeant Mills, a younger officer with a notebook already poised, his pencil twitching like a divining rod. Craddock's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on the body before settling on Eleanor Hargrove, who stood trembling, supported by Captain Trent's steady arm. "Mrs. Hargrove, I presume," Craddock said, his voice clipped yet courteous. "Inspector Craddock, County Police. We'll need to secure the scene and speak with everyone present. No one leaves until I say so." Eleanor nodded faintly, her face pale as the damask curtains. "Of course, Inspector, it's unimaginable. Sir Geoffrey was— oh, it's too dreadful." Craddock motioned to Mills, who began cordoning off the dining area with an efficiency that bordered on mechanical. The servants, huddled in a corner, were dispatched to wait in the kitchen under a constable's watchful eye. Dr. Croft, still kneeling by the body, rose to confer with the inspector. "Cyanide poisoning. I'd stake my practice on it," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "The symptoms, convulsions, cyanosis, are unmistakable. Death within minutes, likely in the food, though I can't say how." "Food, you say?" Craddock's eyes narrowed. "The source, perhaps? Everyone partook, yet only Sir Geoffrey's dead." He turned to the table where the sauceboat sat, its contents congealing ominously. "Mills, bag it for the lab, and the plates, every scrap." Miss Marple, unobtrusive as a shadow, watched the proceedings, her mind weaving threads of observation. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, where a poisoned cordial had unravelled a family's secrets. Greed and resentment bubbling up like yeast in dough. Here, too, Motives lurked beneath the polished surface of Willowbrook's hospitality. She noted Eleanor's quick glance at the captain, a silent plea for reassurance, and the way Lydia's fingers twisted her napkin into knots. Craddock began his interviews in the library, a sombre room lined with leather-bound tomes and portraits of Hargrove ancestors, their eyes glinting with ancestral judgment. He summoned Eleanor first, who recounted the luncheon's preparations with faltering precision. The menu was my cook's finest: pheasant from our estate, vegetables from the garden. The sauce, a family recipe with mushrooms and herbs. I tasted it myself this morning. It was perfect. Her voice broke, and she dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Who could do such a thing? Did Sir Geoffrey have enemies? Craddock asked, his pen poised. Eleanor hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, then closed. He was a formidable man, Inspector. A barrister makes adversaries, but none I'd name here. Next came Captain Trent, his bluster subdued but his eyes wary. Langton and I crossed paths years ago, a shipping venture that went belly up. He played hardball, used his legal tricks to squeeze me out. Left a bitter taste, I won't lie. But murder? I'm a sailor, not a poisoner. Craddock pressed. Where were you during the meal's preparation? Trent shrugged. In the conservatory, swapping yarns with Lydia. Ask her. Lydia, when called, entered with a nervous energy, her auburn curls escaping their pins. I was sketching all morning, she said, clutching her hands. Uncle Geoffrey was overbearing. He controlled my trust fund, said art was a waste. We argued last week. He threatened to tie up my inheritance unless I behaved. But I didn't, her voice cracked, and she shook her head vehemently. Craddock's expression remained impassive, but his pencil scratched furiously. Dr. Croft followed, his demeanour clinical. I've known Langton for years, professionally, not personally. He consulted me about his health recently. Anemia, nothing serious. I prescribed potassium ferricyanide, a standard remedy. Harmless unless tampered with, which is impossible. I keep my bag locked. His tone was steady, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in his fingers as he adjusted his tie. The Reverend Hale, summoned next, clasped his hands as if in prayer. Sir Geoffrey advised me on church matters, legalities of our charitable fund. He was exacting. Last night, I overheard him arguing with Lady Isabel in the garden. Harsh words, though I couldn't catch them all. His eyes flicked downward, avoiding Craddock's probing stare. My place is to counsel peace, not to judge. Lady Isabel entered last among the guests, her sapphire gown a stark contrast to her pallid complexion. My husband was a man of strong opinions, she said, her voice cool as a winter stream. We had our differences, as couples do, but nothing to warrant this. I was in the rose garden before lunch, alone, tending the blooms. The maid can confirm. Her gaze was steady, almost defiant, and Craddock noted it with a raised brow. Finally, he turned to Miss Marple, who had slipped into the library unbidden, her presence as unobtrusive as a moth. Miss Marple, isn't it? You've a reputation for noticing things. What's your take? His tone held a hint of skepticism, but his eyes were keen. She smiled demurely, folding her hands. I'm merely an old woman, Inspector, fond of patterns. Like my knitting, people's actions form stitches, some neat, some tangled. I noticed Sir Geoffrey's mustard pot, used only by him, was filled fresh today. And the sauce, such a convenient vehicle, yet only he suffered. Curious, isn't it, how poison finds its mark so precisely? Craddock's jaw tightened, but he nodded, dismissing her with a polite, We'll consider all angles. As the interviews concluded, Craddock conferred with Mills by the dining-room door. The forensic team had arrived, their equipment clattering as they swabbed the sauce boat and examined Sir Geoffrey's plate. Preliminary findings confirmed cyanide in the sauce, accessible to anyone in the kitchen during preparation. "But the mustard pot," Craddock muttered, recalling Miss Marple's remark. "Mills, have it tested separately." Miss Marple, lingering near a bookcase, overheard the exchange, her mind turning like a well-oiled wheel. She thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, whose garden parties often masked rivalries as sharp as thorns. Here the threads were many: the captain's old grudge, Lydia's stifled dreams, the Reverend's guarded demeanour, the doctor's access to chemicals, Lady Isabel's icy detachment, and Eleanor's nervous orchestration. Each held a piece of the puzzle, but which hand had fitted them together? As Craddock issued orders to search the manor, Miss Marple returned to her seat, retrieving her knitting. The needles resumed their rhythmic dance, each stitch a silent tally of human frailty. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting the lawn in a blood-red glow, as if Willowbrook itself mourned the treachery within its walls. The inspector's work was just beginning, but Miss Marple knew the truth lay not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet corners, where secrets whispered louder than words. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Garden. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing Willowbrook Manor's gardens in a twilight glow, the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading roses. The chaos of the dining-room had subsided into an uneasy hush, with Inspector Craddock's men methodically combing the scene for clues. The Shahi guests released from the library's sombre interrogations scattered like leaves in a gust, seeking solace or secrecy in the sprawling estate. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn tightly against the evening chill, ventured into the gardens, her sensible shoes crunching softly on the gravel paths. She moved with the unhurried grace of one accustomed to observing life's subtleties, her mild blue eyes scanning the shadows for truths hidden in plain sight. The rose arbour, a latticework haven draped with crimson blooms, beckoned her first. There, seated on a wrought-iron bench, was Lydia Fairchild, her sketchbook open on her lap, her pencil flying across the page with feverish intensity. The girl's auburn curls caught the last light, framing a face taut with emotion. Miss Marple approached quietly, her presence barely disturbing the stillness. "My dear, your sketches are quite vivid," she remarked, peering at the page. A stark rendering of a shattered wineglass, its edges jagged as if mirroring the day's violence. Lydia started, her green eyes wide. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't see you there. I had to draw to make sense of it all. Uncle Geoffrey's gone, and it's dreadful, but oh, it's selfish to say he was so controlling." Her voice trembled, and she clutched the sketchbook closer. "Aunt Eleanor says he was meddling in my affairs, threatening to block my trust fund if I went to Paris. He wanted me married off to some dull squire, not painting in ateliers. I hated him for it, but I'd never—" She trailed off, her gaze darting to the roses as if they held answers. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, settling beside her. "Youth longs for freedom, my dear, as roses crave sunlight. But families, like gardens, often hide thorns beneath beauty. Did your uncle argue with others here, perhaps?" Lydia hesitated, then whispered, "He and Aunt Eleanor quarrelled last night. About money, I think. I heard raised voices from the study, but I didn't dare eavesdrop." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her mind filing the detail like a stitch in her knitting. Leaving Lydia to her art, Miss Marple wandered toward the fountain. Its gentle gurgle a counterpoint to the manor's tension. There, Captain Marcus Trent and Dr. Reginald Croft stood in hushed conversation, their silhouettes stark against the stone basin. The captain's voice carried, gruff with suppressed anger. "Langton sank our venture, Croft. Used his legal clout to outmaneuver me. Cost me a fortune, and now he's dead before I could settle the score." Dr. Croft's reply was measured, his spectacles glinting in the dusk. "Careful, Trent. Words like that invite suspicion. I warned him about his health. Those pills weren't cheap, and he questioned my fees. But poison, that's beyond my ken." Miss Marple, half hidden by a yew hedge, noted the captain's clenched jaw and Croft's deliberate calm. She recalled a village grocer who'd quarrelled over debts, only to find his ledger balanced by betrayal. Money, she mused, was a motive as old as Cain. As she turned to move on, her foot brushed a discarded cigarette butt, fresh, with the captain's monogrammed case nearby. A small detail, but in her experience, the smallest threads unravelled the tightest knots. Her path led to the herb garden, where Reverend Thomas Hale knelt, pruning sprigs of rosemary with a small knife. His clerical collar gleamed faintly, a stark contrast to the earth-stained cuffs of his shirt. He looked up, startled, as Miss Marple approached. "Miss Marple, seeking solace in nature? These herbs are a comfort, though today's events test even the devout." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly, the knife nicking a leaf. "They say rosemary is for remembrance," Miss Marple said softly, her eyes on his. "You mentioned counselling Lady Isabel. She seems a woman burdened by more than grief." The Reverend's lips tightened. "She confided in me. Yes, her marriage was strained. Sir Geoffrey's demands weighed heavily. She spoke of escape, though not in specifics. As a man of God, I urged patience." He paused, then added, "I saw her in the rose garden this morning, alone, as she claimed, but her heart was elsewhere." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene. "Hearts often wander, Reverend, but actions leave footprints. You've a steady hand with that knife. Learned in your missionary days, perhaps?" Hale flushed, tucking the blade away. "In Africa, one learns many skills. But I prune only herbs, not lives." His words were firm, yet Miss Marple sensed a shadow behind them, like a prayer left unanswered. Returning to the manor, she passed the conservatory, where Eleanor stood alone, staring at the orchids. Her fingers twisted a pearl earring, and her face, unguarded for a moment, betrayed a flicker of fear. Miss Marple paused, pretending to admire a bloom. "Your gardens are a marvel, Mrs. Hargrove. They must demand great care, much like your guests." Eleanor's smile was brittle. "Indeed, Miss Marple. One must tend both with vigilance, lest weeds take root. Geoffrey's death, it's uprooted everything." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her hand, as if she held a secret too heavy to bear. Inside, the atmosphere was taut as a violin string. Craddock's men had searched the kitchen, finding no obvious source for the cyanide, though the sauce boat's contents were en route to the laboratory. Miss Marple lingered near the dining room, where a constable guarded the scene. Her eyes fell on the mustard pot, still at Sir Geoffrey's place, its lid slightly askew. She recalled his habit of slathering it generously, a quirk mentioned in passing by Eleanor at a parish tea. A servant, bustling past, confirmed the pot was refilled that morning. By whom, she couldn't say. As dusk deepened, Miss Marple retired to the ishim, drawing room, where the guests reconvened under Craddock's orders. Their faces, lit by the fire's glow, were a gallery of unease. Lydia's eyes red-rimmed, the captain's moustache twitching, Croft's fingers drumming on his knee, Hale's lips moving silently, and Lady Isabel's gaze fixed on some distant point. Eleanor, attempting to play hostess, offered tea, but her hands shook as she poured. Miss Marple's thoughts swirled like leaves in a storm. She considered the captain's financial ruin, tied to Sir Geoffrey's legal machinations, Lydia's stifled ambitions, tethered to her uncle's control, the Reverend's strained composure, hinting at pressures beyond his pulpit, Croft's access to chemicals, however innocuous, and Lady Isabel's enigmatic calm, masking what? Infidelity, perhaps, or deeper resentment? Eleanor's nervous glances suggested debts, financial or otherwise, owed to the dead man. A sudden commotion broke her reverie. A constable entered, holding a small vial found in the kitchen's waste bin, its label reading, "Photographic Developer." Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's mine! From my darkroom! But I didn't. Someone must have taken it." Craddock's eyes sharpened, but Miss Marple's remained soft, her mind tracing patterns. Cyanide in photography, yes, but also in the doctor's bag, in pest control, in the herb garden's darker corners. The vial was a clue, but was it the key, or a cunning distraction? As Craddock dismissed the group to their rooms, Miss Marple lingered, her knitting resumed as a pretext for observation. The manor's walls seemed to whisper, their secrets coiled like vines. In St. Mary Mead, she'd seen such webs before. Jealousy, greed, desperation, all spun by human hands. Here, the strands were tightening, and she sensed the truth lay not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet moments, where whispers in the garden revealed more than shouts in the hall. Chapter 6. A Second Shadow. The new day dawned over Willowbrook Manor with a deceptive serenity, the morning mist curling around the estate like a shroud, softening the harsh edges of yesterday's tragedy. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, each guest moving as if under a microscope, their gestures measured, their glances guarded. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the breakfast table in a quiet corner, sipped her tea with the calm precision of one accustomed to unravelling life's knottier threads. The room, less grand than the dining hall, but no less elegant, was adorned with chintz curtains and a sideboard laden with kedgeree, kippers, and toast. Yet the spread went largely untouched, the guests' appetites dulled by the spectre of Sir Geoffrey's death. Inspector Craddock's presence loomed large, his men stationed discreetly at every exit, their notebooks ever at the ready. The forensic report had confirmed cyanide in the sauce, but the mustard pot, Sir Geoffrey's peculiar preference, yielded traces too, a detail Craddock kept close, shared only with his sergeant. Miss Marple, overhearing a whispered exchange as she passed the hall, tucked this away, her mind clicking like her knitting needles. The poison's dual presence suggested a meticulous hand, one that knew its target's habits intimately. Breakfast was a strained affair, served under the watchful eyes of a constable. Eleanor Hargrove, her face drawn beneath carefully applied rouge, attempted to maintain decorum, passing the marmalade with a trembling hand. "We must carry on," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Lydia, picking at her toast, avoided her aunt's gaze, her sketchbook absent for once. Dr. Croft, his spectacles fogged from the steaming tea, spoke little, his attention fixed on his plate. Reverend Hale murmured a grace that felt more like a plea, while Lady Isabel, impeccable in a black silk dress, sipped coffee with an air of detached mourning. Captain Trent, usually boisterous, was subdued, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night, or perhaps too much brandy. As the meal progressed, the captain unfolded his napkin, only to freeze. A small folded note slipped onto his plate, its stark white paper a jarring contrast to the linen. "What's this?" he muttered, unfolding it. His face blanched as he read aloud, his voice rough. "Your secrets die with you. Good Lord, what's this mean?" The table erupted in gasps, all eyes turning to Craddock, who strode forward, snatching the note with gloved hands. "Mills, bag it," he ordered, his tone sharp. "Who handled the napkins this morning?" Eleanor paled further. "The maids laid the table at dawn, under my supervision. No one else touched them." Craddock's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, dispatching a constable to question the staff. Miss Marple, her expression serene, noted the captain's unsteady hand as he reached for his water-glass. And the way Lydia's eyes darted to her aunt, as if seeking reassurance or accusing. The morning's tension spurred Craddock to action. He ordered a thorough search of the guests' rooms, a task that sent murmurs of protest rippling through the group. "This is an outrage," Lady Isabel declared, her voice icy. "My privacy is not to be trifled with." Craddock, unmoved, replied, "Murder trumps etiquette, my lady. We'll be discreet." The search yielded a trove of secrets. In Sir Geoffrey's room, a locked briefcase contained letters, one to Eleanor demanding repayment of a substantial loan, its tone edged with menace. Another, found in Lady Isabel's writing case, was addressed to an unnamed recipient, its words ardent. "I cannot bear this cage any longer. Freedom awaits us." Craddock's brow furrowed as he read it, his suspicions deepening. In Lydia's room, a locked drawer held a vial identical to the one found in the kitchen, labelled Photographic Developer. She protested vehemently when confronted. "It was stolen, I swear. I kept it in my darkroom, but anyone could have taken it." Her eyes brimmed with tears. But Craddock's gaze remained sceptical. Miss Marple, lingering nearby, noted the girl's genuine distress, but also the ease with which such a vial could be planted. A classic misdirection, like a conjurer's trick. Dr. Croft, summoned to explain the cyanide's origins, grew defensive. "My bag contains potassium ferrocyanide for Sir Geoffrey's anemia. Standard, non-toxic unless altered chemically. I checked it yesterday. It was secure." His voice was steady, but his fingers drummed on the table, a nervous tic Miss Marple recognized from her village's anxious postmaster, caught once in a petty theft. The Reverend, questioned about his pruning knife, insisted it was for herbs alone, though his flushed cheeks betrayed unease. Captain Trent admitted to no possessions beyond his sea chest, which held only nautical charts and a flask of rum. As the searches concluded, Miss Marple slipped into the kitchen, ostensibly to thank the cook for the tea. The room was a hive of activity, with maids scrubbing pots under the constable's watchful eye. The cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Bates, was adamant. "The sauce was my own recipe, mushrooms, herbs, a touch of wine. I left it on the counter for 10 minutes while I fetched parsley. No one could have tampered with it." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes straying to the waste bin where the vial had been found. "And the mustard pot, Mrs. Bates? Who filled it?" The cook frowned. "One of the maids, I suppose. Mary, likely. She's new, eager to please." Returning to the drawing-room, Miss Marple pondered the web of clues. The note in the napkin was a bold move, designed to unsettle, perhaps to shift blame. The letters hinted at financial strain and forbidden love, But whose hand wielded the poison? The captain's grudge was palpable, yet his bluster seemed too open for cunning. Lydia's distress felt genuine, but her access to chemicals was damning. Croft's expertise made him a candidate, yet his caution argued against recklessness. The Reverend's piety masked something, guilt perhaps or fear. Lady Isabel's letter suggested a motive, but her composure was impregnable. And Eleanor, her nervous glances and whispered quarrels pointed to debts deeper than money. Craddock, meanwhile, huddled with Mills, discussing the mustard pot's significance. If the cyanide was there, it was targeted, he mused. Langton's habit was well known. Someone close planned this. Miss Marple, overhearing, thought of her neighbour, Mrs. Price, whose gossip about a poisoned jam jar had cracked a village scandal. Precision, she knew, was the killer's hallmark, and the mustard pot was no accident. As the guests dispersed to their rooms, under orders to remain on the estate, Miss Marple lingered by the fireplace, her knitting a soft rhythm in the silence. The film note, the vial, the letters, all were threads in a tapestry of deceit, each stitch revealing a pattern of human frailty. She recalled a St. Mary Mead widow who'd hidden her crimes behind a veil of tears, much like the tears now staining Eleanor's handkerchief. The manor's walls seemed to close in, their secrets pressing like a storm about to break. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet certainty. The truth was near, lurking in the shadows cast by a second, unseen hand. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. The afternoon sun hung low over Willowbrook Manor, its rays filtering through the leaded windows of the drawing-room, casting a lattice of light and shadow across the gathered guests. The room, with its polished oak panelling and plush velvet armchairs, should have exuded comfort. But an oppressive tension clung to the air, as if the very walls held their breath. Sir Geoffrey Langton's death had fractured the veneer of civility. And now, under Inspector Craddock's unrelenting scrutiny, the cracks in each guest's facade were widening. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near the hearth, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the room's unease, observed the scene with her characteristic calm, her eyes as sharp as the needles in her hands. Inspector Craddock stood before the fireplace, his lean frame silhouetted against the flickering flames, his notebook tucked under one arm. His voice, steady and commanding, cut through the murmurs. "We're dealing with murder, calculated, deliberate. One of you poisoned Sir Geoffrey, and I intend to find out who. The evidence points to the mustard pot, laced with cyanide, a choice that suggests intimate knowledge of his habits. Speak now, or the truth will find you out." The guests shifted uneasily, their faces a gallery of strained expressions. Eleanor Hargrove, seated on a settee, clutched a lace handkerchief, her eyes darting to each face as if seeking an ally, or a culprit. Captain Marcus Trent, his moustache bristling, leaned forward, his voice gruff. "This is preposterous, Craddock. You're barking up the wrong tree. Langton had enemies, aye, but I'm no chemist. My quarrel with him was business, old history not worth killing over." His gaze flicked to Lady Isabel, a challenge in his eyes. Why not ask her ladyship? Word is, her marriage wasn't all roses. Lady Isabel, poised as ever in her black silk, met his accusation with a glacial stare. "Captain, your insinuations are as crude as your manners. My husband and I had our differences. Show me a couple who doesn't. But I was in the garden, as the maid confirmed. If you're looking for motive, perhaps your own debts to Geoffrey are worth a glance." Her voice was smooth, cutting like a blade wrapped in velvet. Lydia Fairchild, perched on the edge of an ottoman, burst out, "Stop it, all of you! Uncle Geoffrey was cruel, controlling my life, my art, but I didn't kill him. That vial in the kitchen wasn't mine, not any more. Someone took it to frame me." Her voice cracked, her green eyes brimming with tears. Eleanor reached for her niece's hand, murmuring, "Darling, no one believes you do such a thing." But Miss Marple noted the faint hesitation in Eleanor's touch, as if trust were a fragile thread stretched taut. Dr. Reginald Croft adjusted his spectacles, his tone measured but strained. "Inspector, I've said it before. My prescription for Sir Geoffrey was harmless. Potassium ferrocyanide, not cyanide. I'm a physician, not a poisoner. But if we're pointing fingers, the captain's grudge was no secret, and the Reverend, well, he's been oddly quiet." All eyes turned to Reverend Thomas Hale, who sat with his hands folded, his face a mask of solemnity. Hale's voice was low, almost a whisper. "I seek only to guide, not judge. Sir Geoffrey's demands on the church fund were taxing, but I bore them in faith. I heard his argument with Lady Isabel, yes, but murder is a sin I'd never condone." His fingers tightened, betraying a flicker of unease, and Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the faint smudge of earth on his cuff, a remnant of his herb garden labours. Craddock's eyes swept the room, his patience thinning. "Letters, a threatening note, a vial, each points to someone here. The mustard pot was no accident. Who knew Sir Geoffrey's habits best?" His question hung like a guillotine, and the silence that followed was deafening. Miss Marple, her knitting needles pausing, cleared her throat softly. "If I may, Inspector." All heads turned, some with curiosity, others with veiled irritation. "In my village, I've seen how small habits, like a preference for mustard, become common knowledge among those closest. The pot was filled fresh, yet the sauce was poisoned too. A clever mind might use one to mask the other, like a double stitch in a pattern to hide a flaw." Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic, but her words landed like pebbles in a still pond, rippling through the room. Craddock's brow furrowed, but he nodded, recognizing the weight of her observation. "You're suggesting a diversion, Miss Marple. The sauce as a decoy." She smiled faintly. "I suggest only that people are predictable, Inspector. Their motives, greed, fear, love, shine through their actions like light through a stained-glass window." The accusation sparked a flurry of protests. Captain Trent slammed his fist on the armrest. "I'll not be painted a villain. Langton cheated me, but I'd have faced him man to man, not with poison." Lady Isabel's lips curled. "Really, Captain, your bravado is tiresome. Perhaps Eleanor's financial troubles with Geoffrey are more pertinent." Eleanor gasped, her face flushing. "How dare you? Geoffrey lent me money, yes, but it was a private matter settled amicably." Lydia sprang to her feet. "Aunt Eleanor, don't let them twist things. Uncle was pressuring you. I heard it." Dr. Croft interjected. "Enough. This finger-pointing muddies the waters. The cyanide came from somewhere. Perhaps the Reverend's missionary days taught him more than prayers." Hale's eyes widened, his voice rising. "Blasphemy! I've served only good, even when Geoffrey's audits threatened the church." As voices clashed, Miss Marple's thoughts raced, piecing together fragments like a quilt. The threatening note to Trent suggested a mind intent on sowing chaos, yet its placement in a napkin was theatrical, almost desperate. The letters, Eleanor's debt, Isabel's lover, pointed to tangled motives, but the mustard pot's precision hinted at someone with intimate access. She recalled a St. Mary Mead baker whose poisoned loaf had masked a personal vendetta, the clue lying in a single crumb, overlooked by all but her. Craddock raised a hand, silencing the room. Enough! We've searched rooms, tested evidence. The lab confirmed cyanide in both sauce and mustard, but the pot's dose was lethal. Someone here knew Sir Geoffrey's quirk and used it. His gaze lingered on each face, searching for a telltale flinch. I'll have answers by nightfall, or we'll dig deeper. Bank records, correspondences, everything. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple remained, her knitting resumed, each stitch a meditation on human nature. She thought of Eleanor's strained composure, masking financial strain, Trent's bluster, hiding old wounds, Lydia's passion, teetering on desperation, Croft's clinical detachment, perhaps a shield, Hale's piety, fraying at the edges, and Isabel's icy calm, a fortress around her secrets. The manor's grandeur felt hollow, its walls echoing with whispers of betrayal. Outside, thunder rumbled, a storm brewing to match the one within. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet resolve. The truth, she knew, was like a storm cloud, heavy, inevitable, waiting to break. And when it did, it would illuminate the killer's face as surely as lightning revealed the night. Chapter 8. The Unveiling. The drawing-room at Willowbrook Manor, bathed in the flickering glow of the fire, seemed to contract under the weight of impending revelation. Its ornate furnishings and ancestral portraits mere backdrop to the drama unfolding within. Rain lashed the windows, driven by a storm that had broken with sudden ferocity, mirroring the tempest of suspicion among the guests. Inspector Craddock stood at the room's centre, his lean frame taut with purpose, his notebook now closed, a signal that his inquiries had reached their climax. The guests, summoned for what Craddock promised would be the final reckoning, sat in a tense semicircle. Eleanor Hargrove, her hands knotted in her lap. Captain Marcus Trent, his moustache drooping with fatigue. Lydia Fairchild, her eyes wide with apprehension. Dr. Reginald Croft, his spectacles glinting like twin shields. Lady Isabel Langton, her composure a fragile veneer, and Reverend Thomas Hale, his face ashen, lips moving in silent prayer. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her corner chair, her knitting a soft rhythm against the storm's howl, surveyed the assembly with her gentle yet unyielding gaze. She had seen such gatherings before in St. Mary Mead, where village squabbles like this murder peeled back layers of politeness to reveal raw human motives, greed, fear, vengeance, all as predictable as the seasons, yet endlessly varied in their execution. Craddock's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a gavel. We've unravelled the threads of this crime. Cyanide in the mustard pot, not the source, killed Sir Geoffrey, a targeted act requiring knowledge of his peculiar taste. The threatening note to Captain Trent, the vial in the kitchen, the letters, all distractions, but the truth lies in precision. Someone here knew Sir Geoffrey's habits and exploited them. Accusations flared anew. Captain Trent growled, I've said it before. I'd have settled my score with fists, not poison. Lydia's voice trembled. That vial wasn't mine. It was planted. Lady Isabel's tone was icy. My husband's enemies were legion, Inspector, but look to those with access, not me. Eleanor's protest was feeble. This is my home. Why would I destroy its peace? Dr. Croft's retort was clipped. My medicine was tampered with. Someone else's doing. Hale murmured, The Lord sees all. I've no part in this sin. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her voice soft but commanding attention like a bell in fog. Inspector, If I may offer a perspective from an old woman who's seen much of human nature, Craddock nodded, his scepticism tempered by her earlier insights. The room stilled, all eyes on the frail figure whose mild demeanour masked a razor-sharp mind. "It's the small things, you see," she began, her tone conversational, as if discussing a village fete. "Like my neighbour, Mrs. Clement, who once solved a theft by noticing a misplaced teacup. Here, the mustard pot tells the tale. Sir Geoffrey alone used it, a habit known to those closest, his wife, his hostess, perhaps a confidant. The source was a clever ruse, poisoning all to mask the true target. But the pot required a steady hand, a knowing mind." She paused, her eyes sweeping the group. "The note to Captain Trent was theatrical, meant to muddy waters. The vial in the kitchen, poor Lydia's, yes, but too obvious, like a clue in a penny dreadful. The letters, debts, love, point to motives, but the poison source is subtler. Dr. Croft's potassium ferricyanide, harmless alone, can be altered with chemical skill into cyanide. Not by a doctor, who'd be too cautious, but by one with knowledge from elsewhere." Her gaze settled on Reverend Hale, who stiffened, his hands gripping his chair. "Reverend Hale," she said gently, "you've been most discreet, but human frailty is universal. In St. Mary Mead, our vicar once hid a debt behind sermons, much as you've hidden yours. Sir Geoffrey audited your church fund, didn't he? He found discrepancies, money siphoned, perhaps for personal needs. Blackmail followed, threatening ruin." Hale's face drained of colour, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Preposterous! I serve the church faithfully." But Miss Marple continued, undeterred. "You visited Dr. Croft's surgery last week, offering a blessing for his work. His bag was there, unlocked, a moment's access to swap a vial. Your missionary days in Africa taught you chemistry, didn't they? Poisons for pests, knowledge you carried quietly. The mustard pot was filled by a maid, but you were in the kitchen that morning, blessing the staff. A pinch of cyanide slipped from a hidden vial was enough." The room gasped, eyes darting to Hale. Craddock stepped forward, his voice steely. "Is this true, Reverend?" Hale's composure cracked, his hands trembling. I meant no harm at first. The funds were for the poor, but I only borrowed. Geoffrey threatened to expose me, ruin my calling. I couldn't bear it." Miss Marple's voice remained soft. "And the note to Captain Trent? A desperate ploy to shift suspicion, placed when you helped set the table. But your cuff, Reverend, stained with mustard, unnoticed until now. A small slip, like a dropped stitch, unravels the whole." Craddock signalled to Sergeant Mills, who approached with handcuffs. "Thomas Hale, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Geoffrey Langton." Hale rose, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of his sin had finally broken him. "God forgive me," he whispered, as Mills led him away. The room exhaled, tension dissipating like mist. Eleanor, tears streaming, clutched Lydia's hand. "How could we not see?" Captain Trent muttered. "Blighter hid it well." Lady Isabel's mask slipped, revealing relief, perhaps at her own secrets remaining buried. Dr. Croft shook his head, murmuring, "I should have locked my bag." Lydia, sobbing, whispered, "Thank you, Miss Marple." As Craddock oversaw the formalities, Eleanor approached Miss Marple, her voice tremulous. "How did you know truly? You saw what we missed." Miss Marple smiled, folding her knitting. "My dear, I've lived long in a small village. People are much the same. Greed, fear, shame, all dressed in Sunday best." The Reverend's heart strayed, as hearts do, and his hands followed. Like my old friend Dolly Bantry's tales, the truth hides in plain sight, waiting for a quiet eye to see it. The storm outside softened to a drizzle, the manor's gloom lifting as justice took root. Craddock, pausing by Miss Marple, tipped his hat. "You've a gift, madam. We'd have taken longer without you." She chuckled softly. "Just an old spinster's knack, Inspector. Now I believe there's tea in the conservatory." As the guests dispersed, some to pack, others to reflect, Miss Marple gathered her shawl and stepped into the hall, the portraits watching her departure. Willowbrook's secrets had been laid bare, but she knew others lingered, dormant until the next gathering stirred them. For now, the storm had passed, and the truth, like a well-knit shawl, wrapped the manor in uneasy peace.